From a shitty 2010 Microsoft LifeCam microphone to a new, based, high-quality microphone, this is Tales from America's Hot Mic, episode 16. Now, we've got quite an upload schedule going right now. I think I'm going on a month or 2 months between these two time gaps I'm putting up a new episode. Sorry, that's just how it seems to be. I'm probably going to start doing some different stuff from now on if I do upload content. Most of the things I've been doing in relation to politics has just been discussions with friends or people I know in real life, seeing as doing that does more good than screaming at boomers on Gab or uploading my videos for all 4 of you to listen to. That's not to say I don't appreciate you guys. It's just a comment about my reach, my ability to get the message out. That being said, what may go up on this channel now will be little projects I'm doing, whether it's writing and doing narrations of stories, whether they be funny or serious, or maybe even some uploads from some stuff I do with friends. Some of you may have heard Horrified Onlooker, who's a guest on this channel, and I do shows with sometimes on his Long Way Down show, and Lance, who showed up in the base test on the YouTube channel. As always, if you have questions to submit, stories to submit, or topics you'd like me to talk about or address, you can send an email to me at questionstfw@gmail.com, or you can leave a comment on this video or any of my other videos, making suggestions, adding questions, or talking about stories. The main topic of this episode will be something that I've discussed before on the show, which is accountability for the sake of our brothers. As I've said before, one of the greatest gifts we were given in this life are our racial kin. Through them and the faith in Christ that we've had historically, we've been able to accomplish things no other race on earth could even dream of. No cathedral, no great evangelical mission was accomplished by the will or work of one single isolated person. And since the beginning, we've been instructed by God to take care of our brothers. In fact, the very first set of brothers to exist, Cain and Abel, this exact instruction from God was given to us. When Abel was missing, God asked Cain in Genesis 4:9, "Where is Abel thy brother?" And Cain answered, "I know not. Am I my brother's keeper?" Sarcastically speaking. The truth is, if we were all individuals and we didn't have to worry about the brothers that God gave us, he wouldn't have asked Cain in the first place, "Where is your brother?" On top of this, as Christians, we're called even more so to watch after our brothers. You know, listeners, there's a reason why Jesus refers to the people who are under the care of others as sheep. It's because sheep, if left to their own devices, can't defend themselves, they don't know any better between danger and safety, and they often wander into problems, which sometimes harm them or kill them. He could have compared people to dogs, he could have compared them to any other animal, but instead he chose a sheep. An animal that needs a caretaker. The reason why he chose this is because he was making a statement about the average person. And what does the average person do? The average person chases after the set of keys which jingles the loudest or shines the brightest. They go in whichever way they're corralled. Whoever can corral them the hardest will get their allegiance. We see this in people who are afraid, for good reason of course, to lose their jobs because they spoke out about something, who are afraid of losing custody of their children. And those are the people who have some kind of reason. Those are the people who maybe know better but fear some kind of consequences, as opposed to other people who simply go along to get along because they have no thought going between their ears. It's almost like the NPC meme. 100 years of individualism, 100 years of a shepherd stepping out and letting the sheep do what they will, has showed us the absolute failure of what happens when Christians decide not to take care of their brothers. What are we, as Christians, commanded to do from God himself? If we open to John chapter 21, starting at verse 15, This is when Christ comes back and makes his appearance after his resurrection and talks to the disciples. He asks Peter, "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these?" Peter answers, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." He said to him again a second time, "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me?" And he said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know all things, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." Jesus commissioned Peter and the other disciples to tend to the sheep, to those who they were given responsibility over. He didn't tell them, "Let the sheep do what they want." He didn't say the sheep know better for themselves, let them go however they want to go. He also didn't tell Peter, "Worry about yourself. Don't worry about these other people, they're not your responsibility." It's not good enough that you only worry and pray for yourself. It's not good enough that you only manage your own household, though you should. You have a responsibility to take care of your brothers. These individualists, like Jordan Clean Your Room and Wash Your Penis Peterson, don't know what makes a society run. This concept of only watching yourself and making sure you're okay is a very Jewish one. One that has nearly ended thousands of years of white progress. Right now, we're living in a system that is designed to thoroughly disarm the minds of the whites that live within it. Though a majority of them are already sheep, it works even harder to take away what little sense of self-awareness they still have. The sad fact of the matter is, more often than not, when you talk to your average white person living in America today, when you talk to them about any political topic or even a religious topic, they'll say the same Jewish nonsense that they've been taught for their entire lives. And I know the temptation, the immediate response you want to have. Fuck you, go to hell, I want nothing to do with you. This is the wrong answer. This is the wrong solution. You have to understand that for a majority of human history, the average person lived in a village. They knew 100 people, and what they saw around them was nature, was beauty. Now, the average baby grows up on an iPad, immediately blasted with nonsense through their eyes. When they're old enough to walk and go to school, they're taught by some homo sodomy from a young age. They turn on the television. They're exposed to trannies. When they're old enough to read, they read about the Holocaust. Show some mercy for your brother. That's not to say you should throw yourself out there and throw yourself on the spear for the sake of people who are total degenerate, reprobate pieces of shit. There is a time when a sheep is no longer a sheep, but a carcass, a corpse, something that only is a means to spread disease. You know the difference between these kinds of people that I'm referring to. There's a difference between your average magatard family member who just doesn't know any better because they can't think. They don't believe or understand anything outside of the television that they've been watching their entire lives. There's a difference between this kind of person and someone who takes their kid to a Jewish doctor to have their genitals chopped off and be injected with fake hormones. There's a difference between a person who sends their children to public school because they don't know any better and someone who purposely buys black baby dolls for their white daughters to raise because they want them to be not racist. One of these two are the sheep. The one that you were called to watch after as a Christian. The one you were called to minister to. The one you were called to be a keeper of for the sake of the fact that he's your brother. Jesus commanded us to tend to his sheep. And to what extent does that mean? From John 15:4-6, what man of you, having 100 sheep, if he loses one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one which is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls his friends and neighbors, saying to them, "Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep which is lost." We're not called to make a half-hearted attempt at talking to family members and talking to friends and potential white allies and potential white brothers who can wake up in some way that's with no effort, with no care, with no love. We're called to journey out into the wilderness and find those that can be saved and bring them aboard. put them on our shoulders, and take them away from danger. We're called to tend to the sheep, to drive away the wolves, to feed the sheep. And feed them what? In our case, we're able to feed them wisdom. Though I might argue with you that in a couple of years, it's going to literally be to feed the sheep when there's no more food in this country. But I digress. Your brothers have been fed nothing but lies for most of their lives. I challenge all of you who are listening that any of you is a person who at one point or another did not believe in this nonsense that they're pushing. That one of you didn't believe at some point, don't judge, what happens behind closed doors is okay, consenting adults, any other idea. If it weren't for the sake of other white people who gave a shit, who would put themselves out there for your sake, who put themselves out there that fed you truth, that tended to you. If it wasn't for the sake of them, you would be no different. You'd be buying into the same shit. Whether it was some post you came across, a green text from 4chan, screenshotted and sent into a server, whether it was some radio host who had a slip of the tongue and said a little too much, it was the truth that was being fed to you. And you have the responsibility to pass it along and do the same. There are varying degrees in which a sheep can be lost. Some merely wandered off the plantation a few paces. Others have gone off far away, but are still salvageable. When you see your family member, when you see a brother on the internet, in real life, someone you know who it wouldn't destroy your life talking with them, who's talking about the so-called Holocaust, or who's talking about how we need to help brown immigrants or black people with reparations, don't detest the sheep because he's caught in a patch of briar thorns. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and only through the mercy of Christ, only through his help, are we lifted up. In the same way, offer some Christ-like mercy to your brothers. It's the only way we're coming out of this. Which brings me to my next topic, which is infighting. The right wing has had a problem with infighting for a very long time. And something else that we're having a problem with now, apparently, is Christian infighting. As I'm sure a majority of my listeners know, Common Filth has made a comeback here on Odyssey, on BitChute, I think on Rumble, but I don't know anyone who actually uses that platform. I just want to make a short statement about some of the stuff he's been saying recently. Now, I want to preface this by saying I have a lot of love for Common Filth. Like a lot of other people, if it wasn't for his work, I wouldn't be Christian. I wouldn't have picked up the Gospels. With that being said, it seems to me like a lot of what Common Filth is promoting among Christians is isolation, alienation. He's got a lot of stuff to say about Orthodox Christians. He's got a lot of stuff to say about Catholics, sometimes even Protestants as well. And I'm not talking about his criticisms of the various churches. I'm talking about his criticisms of these people, the Orthodox Christians, the Catholics, the Protestants. That's not to say that some criticisms can't be made of each group. But as we stand right now, there is no era in which there is more metaphysical evil existing on this earth, especially in the country that we both live in. There is no reason why Christians should be the main topic of harassment or the main topic of insult, as opposed to Jews, trannies, sodomites, the extreme violence that whites are suffering at the hands of blacks because of our totally lopsided legal system. The list goes on. Right now, in the sea of evil that we're all living in, we Christians are like men on a boat in the middle of a tempest in the ocean. We should be focused instead of throwing each other overboard because of who's more right in this way, or you fast on Wednesday and Friday, therefore you go into the ocean, or whatever. We should be focused on bailing out water and shooting sharks swimming around the boat instead of throwing them food, made from our own brothers being thrown overboard because they had some kind of doctrine you disagree with. We're not talking about Jehovah's Witnesses. We're not talking about Mormons. We're not talking about some kind of outlandish heresy. We're talking about mainline Protestants. We're talking about Orthodox Christians and Catholics. Denominations of Christianity which prevented Islam from turning Europe into a caliphate. denominations of Christianity which have spread the gospel throughout the world. There is no reason why Christians should be the target of ridicule more often than Jesus Christ's killers. If you have more bad things to say about Christians than you do about Jews, you have a problem. I ask people like CF to be fair about his criticisms. In his last episode, he posted more screenshots from the cringe retard Zoomer Theosis. What he didn't show you was the entire comment thread from many different Orthodox Christians, including myself, lampooning him for being an idiot. Someone who's bastardizing the traditions of the church, someone who's bastardizing the word of God. There's a reason why people like him are being used as the example of your problems with Orthodox Christianity, specifically, as opposed to tweets from someone like Rick from Rome is Burning. It's not an intellectually honest thing to do, and it's not an argument made in good faith. With that being said, once again, I'm not making enemies with common filth. That's the opposite of what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to make the statement that Christians have to work together in the midst of this. Put our doctrinal stuff aside for the time being until we can get child rapists, child genital mutilators out of our society. Then we can hash out what problems we have between the faiths and their various adherents. The last topic I want to talk about is another thing I've referenced before. That's having confidence that we are going to live to see the second coming of Christ and the new earth, the new kingdom. I laud and appreciate the faith that a lot of Christians show when they talk about stuff like this. That the only way things are going to get better is when Christ returns, and honestly, we're just on a downward spiral. It's not going to get any better. I appreciate your faith. I really do. But as I've said before, having such an attitude never creates a Christian society. You are not actively creating a better world for your children to live in. Christ did not say, stop having children. In fact, he said, go forth and multiply from the very beginning of the Bible. That's our duty. Go forth and multiply. And what do we do with the sheep we bring into the world? We tend to them. We feed them. We don't leave them to their own devices. We don't worry about just ourselves. We tend to the sheep. And of course, it's very convenient to have confidence that we'll live to see Christ's return, because that means we won't have to do anything to make a better world. It means we won't have to do our duty to minister and spread the gospel. That's easy. And of course, we would like the easy thing. We would like the easy answer. I want to step in and offer you an example of how maybe this is not the end times. There have been many points in Christian history in which things have been pretty horrible for us as a group of people. During Nero's reign, there was a historian named Tacitus who wrote about the experience Christians had under Nero. Here's an example. In their very deaths, they were made the subjects of sport, for they were covered with the hides of wild beasts and worried to death by dogs, or nailed to crosses, or set fire to, and when the day waned, burned to serve for the evening lights. Nero offered his own garden players for the spectacle and exhibited a Circensian game, indiscriminately mingling with the common people in the dress of a charioteer or else standing in his chariot. For this cause, a feeling of compassion arose towards the sufferers, though guilty and deserving of exemplary capital punishment because they seemed not to be cut off for public good, but were victims of the ferocity of one man. We're not there yet. We're heading there, but we're not there yet. I've mentioned before many times the evils that the Russian and Ukrainian Christians experienced under the Jews in the Holodomor. The Germans experienced this too, under Soviet occupation. In Nemmersdorf, such evil things were done to Christians as having their intestines cut out, nailed to a post, and forced to run in a circle until their organs had popped out. We are not there yet. What Christians had suffered in Dresden, albeit perhaps an argument could be made that this wasn't direct persecution directly from the Jews but by the hands of fellow Christians, although I would argue that. The Christians in Dresden, in Berlin, in Hamburg, in every German city under the fire bombings. We're not there yet. We have a long way to go. Now imagine for a second what would have happened had the Christians simply given up and said, we're just going to wait for Christ to come and do all the work under Nero, we would have never have had the gospel spread to the rest of man. The gospel wouldn't have spread from west to east within Europe. We wouldn't have had Byzantium. We wouldn't have had any of that. This is what you advocate for when you say we simply just have to wait. Christ is going to come in our lifetimes. We don't have to do any of the work. We don't have to prepare. We don't have to help our brothers. We just have to worry for ourselves. You know, there's a parable that speaks very closely to the situation. It's in Luke chapter 12. Christ compares Christians to servants watching over his house. The servants watching over the house of the master while the master is away. Christ says, who then is that faithful and wise servant, whom his master will make ruler over his household, to give them the portion of food in due season? Blessed is the servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will make him ruler over all he has. But if that servant says in his heart, my master is delaying his coming, and begins to beat the male and female servants, and to eat and drink and be drunk, the master of that servant will come on a day when he is not looking for him, and at an hour when he is not aware, and will cut him in two, and appoint his portion with the unbelievers. And that servant who knew his master's will, and did not prepare himself, or do according to his will, shall be beaten with many stripes. But he who did not know, yet committed things deserving of stripes, shall be beaten with few. For everyone to whom much is given, from him much will be required, and to whom much has been committed, of him they will ask the more. We are charged with looking after Christ's sheep, his estate, his house, while he's gone. Those that leave what Christ has appointed us to their own devices. Because surely the master will come and be happy when he sees we weren't taking care of his flock or watching his house, because we expected him to come back and repair it and do our jobs. They'll receive stripes, lashings from the whip. And specifically in the end of that parable, Christ says that those that didn't know any better but deserve stripes will get them, sure. But it's those that knew better and chose not to do the right thing that get worse. That's you and me. If you're listening to this show, or you're on this corner of the internet as opposed to listening to Steven Crowder or some other mainstream conservative bullshit that doesn't tell you to be a better person, to tend to Christ's sheep, to manage the flock, and to look after your racial brothers, you know better. You are called to be different. So what I leave you with is this. Take care of your brothers. Manage the sheep, those around you, that if you truly love Christ, you'll do what he says and tend to his sheep and feed his sheep. That the sheep trapped in the thorns and the briar patches who are able to be saved, you drive the wolves away from them, especially if the wolf is wearing the clothing and tries to maintain the appearance of a Christian or a minister or an evangelist, someone who's speaking the devil's lies but pretending to have the truth of Christ. Drive them away from the sheep violently. And to those who can't be saved, after you've made an honest Christian attempt to be a keeper of your brother, shake the dust off your sandals and move on. This has been Tales from America's Hot Mic, episode 16. Thank you for listening. Hail Christ. Hail victory.